What camera should I buy? It's probably the most asked question that we get, and not just from beginners, actually. So whether this is your first camera that you're buying or you're making an upgrade, here's 5 things to look for before you click purchase. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to check out our full course where we break down this concept and hundreds of other concepts even further. But this video is essentially going to be a step-by-step guide that'll act as a funnel for you to eventually narrow down the perfect camera for whatever you want to use it for. You can spend a lot of time overthinking, or just watch this, narrow down the most important elements that you need, and start shooting. So let's do it. So jumping right into this, we're gonna narrow down the most important elements that you need in your camera. I wish I just had like an extensive list of every camera ever made with all their specs, but because there's so many, it's actually easier to just describe what you want. Then look at specific options available to you in that category. So the first thing we're gonna ask ourselves is, what is this camera for? Are you using it just for video, a mix of photo and video? Are you filming run and gun vlogs? Are you shooting professional cinematic content for clients, etc.? For example, if I'm looking for a camera that I want to be able to shoot cinematic Instagram reels or YouTube videos with, but I also want it to be my photo camera, then I'm looking for a hybrid camera. And if I want a camera that I just turn on, I don't have to mess with any of the settings, it just works, then I probably want more of a vlog camera. And if I want a camera that's more for filming professional clients, I'm looking for a cinema camera. Now, answering that one question probably just eliminated like 2/3 of all the cameras out there. So now we're gonna break it down even further with specs. And instead of going through every little detail on a camera's spec sheet, let's just go over a few that are gonna be the most important to us. Now, most people tend to look at resolution right away. It's the first thing they look at. Is it 4K, 1080, 720? Hopefully not. And resolution is super important, don't get me wrong, but most new cameras are shooting at a resolution of 4K or higher, which is way more than you need for most shooting scenarios. So unless you know for a fact that you're gonna need a specific resolution higher than that, we won't need to focus too much on that spec, but I would just double check before you click purchase. Now, frame rate is the next thing that I typically look at on a camera spec sheet, but only if I plan on using that camera for slow motion. Most cameras are gonna do 24, 30, and maybe even 60 frames per second. Then a select few are actually gonna jump up to 120 and maybe even higher. So if that's important to you, add it to your list. If it's not, don't worry about it. And then the sensor is the next thing you wanna keep in mind for 3 reasons: low light, dynamic range, and focal length. Some cameras are micro four thirds, APS-C, full frame, etc., etc. The bigger the sensor, the better, typically, that camera is gonna perform in low light. Sony's, for example, have great low light capabilities because they're usually full frame, and they have great image processing in their native ISO. That's a whole topic we could unpack. There's a lot more in the course, but generally speaking, full frame is what I would aim for if that's an option in your product category. And then bigger, more advanced sensors also contribute to the dynamic range of your camera, which is its ability to handle dark shadows and bright highlights all at the same time. Really, really good dynamic range, like 17 stops that you might get in like an ARRI Alexa, is gonna come at a really high premium. I mean, that's a $100,000 camera. And so I'm not gonna give you like a number of stops that you should be looking for. I would just compare what the cameras in your budget have and then consider going with the better performing one. Your sensor size also has a direct effect on how wide or tight your image is gonna be. And this really only applies if you're attaching lenses onto your camera. But for example, if I were to put a 35mm lens on this Canon EOS RP and to put the same lens on this EOS R, it's gonna be a lot tighter on the RP because the RP has an APS-C sensor, which is smaller than the EOS R's full frame sensor. So I know it's kind of a lot of information. If you don't really care about getting deep into the cinematic side, that might have gone way over your head, but at least write down the specs that are the most important to you. And if you don't have any preference at this point, don't worry about it. As time goes on and you use your camera, you're actually gonna notice features that you really appreciate, and you'll probably notice features that you wish you had. Frankly, my first camera kind of sucked. But as I shot more and more with it, I slowly made a mental list of all the features that I wish my next camera would have. All right, the third question we need to ask ourselves is, what is your budget? How much do you want to spend, and how much are you willing to spend? Now, only you can really answer this question, but to help you out, hybrid cameras are typically in the $1,000 to $6,000 range. Vlog cameras in the $500 to $2,000 range. Cinema cameras are typically in the $3K to $15K range if we're staying kind of conservative, but there's obviously many that land much, much higher than that. You also don't have to buy new. There's tons of great older cameras that have been on the market for a while that you could get for a lot cheaper on Facebook Marketplace. For example, the Sony a7 III, which has been on the market for a long time, brand new, it goes for $2,000. But on Facebook Marketplace, on average, you can find for around $1,000, sometimes even less. So add to your wish list what you would like to spend and then what you're willing to spend. And keep in mind, you might want to add a lens or two, maybe an ND filter, a microphone, some other accessories, a subscription to MusicBed. Wait a minute. Actually, I shouldn't have been there. I mean, we were just talking about cameras and accessories, but I guess once you find a camera and you start making content, you're gonna have to edit that content, and then you're gonna have to find some good music to go with it, which is why you gotta switch to MusicBed. And I'm not just saying that because they're the sponsor of this video. Now, hopefully I don't have to convince you that music is a huge part of every edit. It's kind of like the glue that just keeps everything together. Now, there's a ton of music out there, but finding just the right song and choosing one that you can actually use for your own projects or your client work can be really hard. At least it used to be before I switched to MusicBed. The only platform I trust for authentic music that doesn't sound like a corporate jingle. MusicBed has the largest collection of curated music with over 50,000 songs available. And with their advanced search filters, it's never been easier to find a song. For every one song that I find and like, MusicBed actually suggests a dozen more, and they're just as good. Right now, for a limited time, you can get a 14-day free trial to MusicBed, so you can switch and see the difference yourself. I'm more inspired to create when I have good music, and I think you'll be too. So just hit the link in the description box to switch to MusicBed today. Okay, now that you have a pretty solid wish list put together, I want you to do a Google search. For example, I want to look at my options for a hybrid camera that shoots 4K at 60 frames per second, is full frame, and costs under $2,500. So just copy and paste that into Google. Google's smart, by the way. It'll actually show some pretty solid options that meet those requirements. And you might even get an article that lists some cameras with those specific features and price point. Now, make a list of the cameras that you're finding, kind of look through those options, but I want you to keep a few things in mind while you're doing that. This is our fourth thing to look for when buying a camera, by the way. I want you to ask yourself, what is its product ecosystem? So what's the brand of the camera? And do they have native accessories or lenses or other cameras that might help you to actually complete your camera setup? Like if it's a Sony, they actually have great microphones that are powered directly through the camera at the top, which might be an important feature. So just be thinking through that. You also want to keep in mind, what glass does it use? And more specifically, what lens mount does it use? If you're getting into more professional video work, lenses are actually a really great investment. So if you've already been buying lenses, it might be wise that your next camera uses that same lens mount. That way you won't need to buy any more, hopefully. And then what other cameras exist in that ecosystem that you might want to pair your new camera with, if any? Like if you already own a Sony a7 III, for example, but you want to get a bit more cinematic, the FX3 is a great option because they have a ton of similarities, and the a7 III could actually act as a secondary camera, which is great if you're filming interviews and you want multiple angles. There's a few use cases for that. So now that you've narrowed it down to hopefully just a few prospects, really the last thing to do is just figure out which one you actually prefer in terms of size, grip, ergonomics, button layout, and so on. Best way to do this, if you have the option, is actually just to go to a camera store like B&H, play with it for a little bit. You might even be able to rent or borrow one from a friend if they have it. And if you don't have that luxury available to you, just watch some more YouTube videos, try and see the camera from multiple angles, and then make an informed decision for yourself. Trust me, there's a lot of cameras out there that can accomplish exactly what you need them to. But if you're uncomfortable holding it, or it just has so many buttons that it makes you overwhelmed, it's gonna keep you from using it as much as you'd like to. Now, I really hope this gives you the confidence to finally go through checkout and start making better content. But if you want even more clarity before you hit that final complete purchase button, watch a few more of our intro videos in the full course. I promise you, the best camera in the world will only do so much unless you really know how to use it. And if you don't believe me, just watch any of our beginner versus pro videos where we give a beginner a really expensive camera setup, and then we give ourselves a really cheap budget camera. Not to brag, but the pro always wins. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave a comment, and as always, if you have any further questions, please let me know.